Hi, my name is Steve Rocky. I'm a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 3 of an ongoing series focusing on enrollment of devices in Microsoft Intune. Today's focus will be on Apple devices, iOS, and macOS. So here's the agenda, similar to what we did whenever we covered the Windows devices last time. Just a quick review, very simple, of supported platforms, requirements there. Look at 3 different ways, really kind of 4 ways that we can enroll iOS devices. Then we'll shift over and talk about enrolling macOS specifically. Then talk a little bit about the company portal and a couple of other odds and ends. Wrap up with some troubleshooting, and we'll be done. So to jump right into this, in terms of supported platforms and requirements, as long as you're iOS 9 or better, or macOS OS X 10.11 or better, fully supported for enrolling in Microsoft Intune. So in order to enroll, you do need an MDM management solution. So in our discussions, that will be Intune. You also need Azure AD. Now, you need Azure AD for Intune. There may be other management platforms out there that don't require Azure AD, but if you are using Intune, you are also using Azure AD. So the two kind of go hand in hand. So thinking about the Intune requirements, those are linked together. Okay, so our first enrollment method, the user-initiated manual type enrollment. This would be a bring your own device kind of scenario where a user wants to use their personal device to do work in the organization, access email, that kind of thing. So the idea for this is if they're going to use their device, their own personal device, then there needs to be a mechanism where they can manually choose to enroll that device in MDM management. Right? So we'll walk through how that works. So the MDM enrollment is going to be manual. And then we talked about in the Windows session the idea of Azure AD and the concept of joining Azure AD. In all cases, whenever you have devices managed by Intune, they will be seen in Azure AD, but there's a difference. Right? The only devices that can actually join Azure AD are Windows 10 devices. But other devices can register in Azure AD, and there's advantages of having them do so. You know, there's a number, you know, being able to use conditional access, those kind of things, among them. So all of these devices that you're going to see today are going to be visible in Azure AD, but they are going to be registered versus actually showing Azure AD joined. And then the last thing, we talked in our first session about the different kinds of ownership, either personal owned or corporate owned. And so wherever you have bring your own device, personal device enrollment type scenario, these will be visible in the Intune console as personal owned. Now, there's an exception to that. It could be, as we talked about in the first session, that you have a mechanism in place where you have devices whose identifiers are known, right? So in the iOS world, that might be a serial number. That might be an IMEI number, right? So if you have those preloaded in the Intune console, as soon as Intune sees those, it will consider those corporate devices, regardless of the enrollment method, right? But again, talking about general terms, right? The other thing, just to note before we get into actually seeing this work, the company portal is something we kind of talked about a little bit in the Windows session. Today, you'll see it several times. Basically, the company portal in a BYOD personal device type scenario is the mechanism by which the device will become enrolled in Intune. So you'll see the company portal here in just a sec. Recall that in Windows, for a BYOD scenario, the mechanism by which the device got enrolled was through settings, right? So this is through the company portal. So the process kind of looks like this. You have a user with either an iPad or an iPhone. In my case, I'll use an iPhone. And they are going to download the company portal and work through the company portal, sign into the company portal, and then be able to directly enroll in Intune accordingly. So with that, let me go ahead and just kind of work through the workflow for this. Let me pull in my Apple device, and we'll get started here. So working a bit handicapped today, so Bear with me if I'm a little bit slower. All right, so I've got it. Let's pull it in. I can grab it. There we go. All right, here's my iPhone. All right, so basically what I'm going to do is just go to the company portal and grab the company. Go to the App Store and grab the company portal. So I'm just going to search for it real quick. Here it is. All right, so we're going to go ahead and download the company portal. Let's go ahead and grab it. Good enough. Wait for it to come down. Shouldn't take very long at all. Here it comes. And then once it's downloaded, we'll go ahead and open it. Now, once we open the company portal, we're going to be asked to sign in. So this is my Intune ID. And take me just a second to type this. Very small keyboard here, and hopefully I get it right. All right, on Microsoft.com. All right, and so hopefully if I got all that right, sign in. Good, and now I have to enter the password, which let me pull this off to the left a bit while I do that. One moment. Actually, I'm just going to pause the recording while I do that. So it should be good to go. I'll just go ahead and sign in. So signing in, and company portal should authenticate, load up a few things, and so we're good to go. Now, you're going to see we're not managed yet, so we actually have to go through a couple of steps. I'm going to begin. Actually, a few steps. So these are not hard steps. There are a few of them, so a normal user may get bogged down a little bit, have some questions, whatever, so I'm just answering these. We're going to open settings, and in settings, we're going to load down a management profile. So I'm going to allow opening settings, so I'll allow that. And then here, I'm going to install the management profile, enter my passcode for the device. Actually, let me pause this a sec. Good to go, so I entered it, and so we're going to go ahead and install. Install. There we go. All right, so it's should be good to go. All right, so you see it's running, it's enrolling the certificate. And okay, so we're going to go press install again. I'm going to trust the server, and then should be almost done. Okay, good, close. And now we're going to head back to the company portal. And we're going to open that. And should get a couple of green check marks pretty quick order here. There we go. So now I'm enrolled. And so now I'm being asked what category does this device fit? So again, call your attention back to the first session we did where we talked about some of these different things. You can see that Intune is trying to drop an app on it already. I'm just going to call this an IT device. And so we are good to go. So I will probably come back to the company portal here in just a little bit and show you another couple of things, but let me pull this off to the side for now, and so on. So now that we've done that, let's actually go reflect and see what has happened as a result of doing that in the Intune console. So let me go pull that up. All right, so let's pull Intune. Here we go. And this time I'm using Chrome just to use a different browser. I'm going to connect to Intune. And I'm just going to look at all the devices here. And so the first thing, I'll look at the Azure AD devices, and you'll see right here, I have my iPhone. And look at the status, Azure AD registered, not joined, registered. Right, and then if I look at all devices, this is the Intune view. I'll see it hadn't see right here, hadn't actually quite made it yet, so it should translate over in just a minute. This is an iPad that I did have in here, so we'll just maybe come back there in there it comes in just a minute. iPhone, and it's registered as personal. Right, so it did make it. It is showing as personal because this is a BYOD scenario, and so we should be good there. But enough said, right? I could go through a lot more. I will come back to the company portal in a bit, but just wanted to show you that piece. Now, one of the things I'm going to do here as well is just remove management from these devices. So this is one I forgot to clean up, so I'll go delete it real quick because I want to go enroll these a different way, right? So let me go back here, and then I will remove management from this device again, delete what I just did. And then I also want to clean up the Azure AD list. Okay, cleaned up for me, so that's cool. And then what I want to do is actually go clean the device as well. So I'm going to pull the iPhone back in. Here we go. Right back where we left it. So I'm just going to go back to the main menu. I'm going to remove the company portal. Right, just go ahead and got to hover it with the right pressure. There we go. Get rid of it. And delete. And then I'm also going to go into settings and make sure that my management profile has been removed. Looks like it has been, but I'm in general looking at the management profiles. Looks like there's nothing there. So that's good to go. And our iPhone is now clean. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing the screen on that and pull the Intune console out. And that is a BYOD scenario where you're manually doing some things, right? Okay, the next scenario, right? So this one is interesting. There's a program that Apple has called Device Enrollment Program. There's also a similar program called the Apple School Manager program. There's one also, as of this recording, that has just launched the, I don't remember the name. It's Apple Business something. And it's really, all three of these are very, very similar, like Microsoft is with Autopilot, innovating constantly. So is Apple with DEP and Apple School Manager and their business portal and so on. Basically, what DEP is a automated provisioning method for iPads and iPhones. Right? So whenever you first turn them on, if you have a brand new device that you've just opened the box and you're powering it on, or you have a device that you're resetting for whatever reason and it's turned back on, that the device will check with Apple and it will know to automatically enroll and configure itself according to some various configurations you'll see in just a minute. So these are corporate owned devices, right? So these are typically obtained through either Apple directly or through a reseller. And whenever you go configure the DEP experience, one of the questions you will get asked, and one of the challenges that I have trying to set it up in my lab, more about that in a minute, is that I don't buy iPhones and iPads from Apple or from a reseller that then will register them in DEP for me, right? So that's one question I can't answer when I'm setting up the DEP experience through Apple. Right? But that is something that businesses can do, and then they will have, as they purchase devices and so on, they will get them registered in the DEP portal, and then when those devices turn on, they will be registered with Apple, and Apple will know how to instruct them to configure or to join to an MDM environment or whatever, right? So more on that in a minute. So again, corporate-owned devices. The MDM enrollment is an automatic thing by that device talking to Apple, right? The disposition of this device is no different. Whenever you look in Azure AD, it will show Azure AD registered, right? But if you look at the status of that device, it again will be a corporate-owned device because it's being provisioned through DEP, okay? Now, the way this works is whenever the user turns on the device setup begins. As soon as that device has a Wi-Fi connection, it's going to talk to Apple, check Apple's database and see if that is a DEP-enabled device. If it is, DEP enrollment is going to start. And ultimately, that device will get registered in Intune. Now, again, DEP and Intune are able to work together, but DEP is certainly not just an Intune solution. It works with other MDM providers as well. So whichever MDM provider you want to choose that Apple supports for DEP enrollment, that's where the device would ultimately get registered, right? Now, DEP is interesting because I can't really show it to you live, right? I mentioned one requirement of setting up DEP is that you have an Apple ID or a reseller ID that you can put into the portal as you're registering to indicate where you're getting your devices from. That's one thing, one hurdle. Another hurdle is that in order to sign up for DEP, the organization details that you put into the DEP portal when you're signing up need to be able to be verified as being owned by a company, right? So you've seen in some of my demos tailspintoys.com. That is my domain. That is not a company that I own. So Apple can't verify it is a domain or a business that I own, and so therefore I can't proceed in setting this up. Right? So I thought I would be smart and actually use a family business to get around it and go ahead and get a DEP experience set up. And I did get through part of it, but once I was presented with that difficulty of saying, where am I getting my Apple devices, Apple or an approved retailer, I couldn't answer that question, right? So anyway, what you will see in a minute whenever I get to Intune is kind of a partially working or partially configurable DEP. Right, so the way that, well, and I'll save that for when I get there. So there are ways to kind of light things up so you can play with them in your lab and so forth. And actually, I found a path talking with some people internally where I can go and take one of my devices that I've had around for a while and convert it so that it works in DEP. So let me talk about that just for a minute. Historically, you could not take a device that was not purchased through an authorized channel or from Apple themselves and flagged as a DEP device and actually use it in DEP. Now you can. There's actually a conversion process in this new business portal thing that Apple's launched, but there's also a conversion process you can do with a program called Apple Configurator. By hooking that device to a Mac and running through Apple Configurator, you can convert it and then let it show up in the DEP portal and then assign it like normal and all stuff that's beyond the scope of this discussion, but anyway, just to kind of fill in some gaps. So what I'm going to show you is partially demo and partially stuff that I just have on video. So let's do the first one. So this is the Apple portal. So I would love to be able to show a fully live Apple portal. This is just a screenshot of one. We certainly have access at Microsoft to the Apple portal because we have a presence in Apple DEP. However, I don't have rights to it, and it's a pretty well-protected thing, as you might imagine, because it is a Microsoft corporate portal. But enough here to show you kind of, this is a really simple to navigate console, really important console. So the device enrollment program under there, 3 nodes, basically manage servers. This would be where you would manage your MDM servers. So you might have multiple instances of Intune, or maybe even other third-party management providers that you have access to that you're testing with and so on. So in our DEP portal, Microsoft DEP portal, we have hundreds. I haven't counted them, but just suffice it to say a lot, because there's a lot of folks testing and doing different things in this environment with DEP, right? And then each individual instance of Intune could be assigned different devices. In other words, as you load devices into DEP, you can tell it, hey, whenever you power on and DEP process starts, assign to this particular instance of Intune or whatever the case may be. So managed devices is where you would see the devices. You'll be able to do some of that mapping and so on. You can view assignment history and pretty simple stuff to navigate. The next part I can show you, and I can show it to you live. So there's 2 things that you will want to do when you're enabling DEP. The first thing is you want to take your Intune portal, your Intune tenant, and link it to Apple DEP. Then the second is you want to introduce some different configurations for the DEP environment. So let me show you kind of how to do that. Pull in Intune real quick. All right, and if we kind of skip back to device enrollment, I want to go into the Apple enrollment portal. So the very first thing that I want to do is make sure that I have an Apple MDM push certificate. Now, this is not something specific to DEP, but it's something specific to making sure you have a healthy environment for for Apple enrollment. And so I do have an active certificate, Apple MDM push certificate. And then I have this node, the enrollment program token. So this is Device Enrollment Program, DEP. It's also Apple School Manager. So this is where I would go to actually set things up. And this is something I can't do, yet you'll see I actually have an active token, right? So what I would do is I would come in here and say add, and I would agree to the terms, and then I would download my particular public key, right? So that would come down as a PEM file, a PEM file. And that contains the detail you need to submit to Apple. And then once you have that PEM file, you would come into this section and you would choose whichever is appropriate, either Apple DEP or the School Manager program, and you would upload that token. You would sign into the DEP portal or the ASM portal, upload that token, and then what you would get in return is another file, an Apple token file, a P7M file is the extension. Right? So then you would go ahead and load that file into Intune, and that would light up the various DEP features and so on, so you can see them, which I'll show you in just a minute. So again, let me just call the attention back. Setting up this part that I just showed you, this is where most demo environments really get into trouble. Because if your organization is not a verifiable organization, then the process just can't continue, right? Now, like I kind of alluded to a minute ago, if your organization is enrolled in DEP and you want to set up just your environment where you can see some different things and maybe even convert some iPads or iPhones so that you can use them in your environment, whatever. If there's someone in your organization who will submit the PEM file on your behalf and then line up some things in the DEP portal for you and provide you back the P7M file, then basically you can light up your console kind of like I did. All right? So that said, let's go back and actually look at some of the settings here. So now that I have my token active, all right, I'm going to say OK. And so there's two things. One is I will see a list of devices that are tied to my particular tenant. And those are the ones that when they power on will be configured from my tenant. Now, I don't have any here because I haven't yet gone through the process of taking one or two of my devices and converting them so they're DEP capable. I will do that in the next couple of weeks probably. If I had done that, then I would see those devices here, and all those will synchronize from the DEP portal. Right? There's another configuration you need to do, and that is to set your profile. Right? So the profile then are the ways that you want to configure the device. So let's go ahead and create a profile, and I can just call it test, whatever. And then now we get some interesting options. So select an option. Either enroll with user affinity or enroll without user affinity. So what does this mean? If you're going to enroll with user affinity, really what that means is that you want to factor the user of that device into management. Or said another way, not only do you want to manage the device, you want to manage the user's experience on that device, provide software to that user, let them have access to the company portal, right, as their interface for being able to get into that device and see configurations and so forth, right? Now, if you don't care about factoring that user into management, right, and there could be a number of reasons for that. Maybe it's a situation where devices are handed out to users at the start of the day. It could be a different user on the device from day to day. You really don't care who the user is on the device, whatever. Then you don't probably need user affinity, right? Or if the user that's on the device has no identity in Azure Active Directory, then you probably don't need user affinity, right? I think there could be other reasons too, or hybrids of those. Here's the point. If you're configuring with user affinity, the expectation is, and it's actually part of the workflow now, you will install the company portal as part of DEP registering that device. If you're installing without user affinity, then the company portal would not get installed on that device as part of DEP and should not actually be put on the device not supported to have it on the device because the user that's on the device won't have any meaning for the company portal, right? So let's step through this. So let's say enroll with user affinity. So the next question is, okay, so what kind of authentication do I want to use? Do I want to use company portal authentication? The default is yes. Now, one thing that's interesting, if you use company portal authentication, is that requires that the device will then be configured as a supervised device, right? Supervision of a device is an additional state of management of the device where you can actually do some interesting things to it that in an unsupervised state you can't do. If you look through the Intune console, you will see a number of different configurations that will say supervision only, right? So if you don't have your devices supervised, those settings cannot be applied to the device. But you don't have to use the company portal if you don't want to for authentication. You can go to the classic way of doing authentication. Just know that here you can choose not to have the device in supervised mode. You can also choose to have it in supervised mode. Here, you don't have a choice. It's always supervised, right? So if you need to turn it off of supervised mode, here's your choice. Just know there are some things security-wise that won't work. So let me just show you, right? So if I go down to device management settings, here I get a choice. Is it supervised or is it not? If I say yes over here, which is the default, it is going to be supervised. There's no choice, right? Also, if I'm not supervised, I have a choice, either lock or unlock enrollment, and I have the same choice over here, right? Lock or unlock enrollment. So one of the things you'll see in documentation, and it's kind of true, and I understand why it's written that way, is if you're using DEP, that means that your device cannot be unmanaged. And that's true because if you DEP enroll the device, it will automatically install and enroll an MDM and install the company portal if you have with user affinity. If you reset that device, it will also re-enroll in Intune and the settings will apply. But here's the thing. You saw in settings where there was the management profile loaded, right? If you don't lock enrollment, then a user can go in there and remove that management profile. Now, next time they reset the device, the management profile comes right back. But if you don't want them to have the ability to remove the management profile at all, lock that device, right? There's some other settings here, some Apple configurator certificates and things that you can put on, and so on, right? Then there's settings that you can configure. So this is basically defining what the experience will be like whenever that device gets set up, what you want to allow, what you don't want to allow, that kind of thing. So this is enrolling with user affinity. If you want to enroll without user affinity, then you get the same kind of questions. In fact, I'm going to have to back out of this and go back into it, I think. Yeah. So you get... I've just confused Intune. One moment. Let me just back out of this and go back in. Yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to create a profile. I'm going to go back through and say without user affinity and configure. Good. So again, you can choose supervised, not supervised. You don't have a choice about locking enrollment because it's going to be without user affinity. And then you can choose how your computers will sync and so on. The same settings that you could configure before are here, right? And so on. So that's the additional, or those are the additional configuration options you can have with DEP and how you would set it up in Intune to get things rolling, right? Now, I don't have, as I mentioned, a real DEP device that I can actually show you getting enrolled, but I do want to show you the enrollment process. And so this is a video that one of my peers recorded that shows the DEP enrollment process with user affinity enabled. Now, the other challenge that even if I had a DEP device or a device that was DEP enabled, I would probably struggle to show you the screen live because this is a device that isn't even to the home screen yet. It hasn't even been set up. And so the initial setup screens, I couldn't really project my screen to the PC like I'm doing with the other things I've shown you so far. Right? So the video is not usually a route I like to take, but I'll go ahead and take it for showing you this. So let me go ahead and kick off the video. This is the process. I've shortened this a bit so that we're not just sitting waiting on things to spin and so on. It's a pretty quick process regardless, but just going to watch it. We'll talk about a couple of things that happen. So the enrollment process is going to happen. You see it going forward. We're going to select a language and region as normal. Then we're going to select the Wi-Fi network. You're going to see some starburst here in just a second because the Apple recording experience will hide the selection of Wi-Fi. But as soon as we get Wi-Fi selected, that's when the device has reached out to Apple to realize, oh, this is a DEP-enabled device. So we're going to get our configurations, in this case, from Microsoft, and then going to continue. You'll see the process goes pretty quick from here. And so welcome to iPhone. It's going to go here. We have our home screen. You can see in settings, the management profile has actually been loaded under General. Right, okay, device management, so it's there. And being prompted to sign in here, and we'll see a couple of sign-ins as we go along. So we'll bypass some of those, and now we're actually putting in the Apple ID and going forward. And so now we'll go back to the home screen and scroll to the right. You'll see there is no company portal loaded yet. All right, and so we'll go through, and the company portal will start to provision here very shortly. Okay, and there we go. Right, so the company portal is loading down, takes no time at all, and now we're loaded. So that device, as a part of the DEP workflow, did actually load the company portal. Now, we're still going to have to sign into the company portal, and it's going to have to connect up to Intune like we talked about. There's some work going on to even make this a more streamlined part of the experience, right? But it's better than it was even a few months back before this kind of experience was kind of automated. So you'll see a couple of green check marks, and then we're done. The device has been DEP enrolled and good to go from there, right? All right, so let's move on. That's DEP. Now, another mechanism that you can use for MDM enrollment, actually you can, Apple Configurator is a really powerful tool for working with iOS devices. So let's start basically with a description of that. So basically Apple Configurator is, and the 2 is not by accident, it's called Apple Configurator 2, is an application provided by Apple. It's available, it's a free download from the Apple Store. It does require that you are running on a Mac, right? And it does require that the device you're trying to interface with is connected by a USB cable. But through this method, it enables mass configuration of iOS devices, including MDM enrollment. Does not have to include MDM enrollment, but including MDM enrollment. And it does a lot more, right? So this scenario is, again, considering a corporate-owned device. And the MDM enrollment here will be manual because you're connecting it to a Mac. And Apple Configurator kind of is your tool to go get things done, right? So, but you can do a lot, and you can do a lot in an automated way by connecting to Configurator. So the device, once it's set up, will be a corporate-owned device in Intune, and this is kind of the config. You would have an IT person with a Mac that has Configurator running. You would have either an iPad or an iPhone connected by USB to this device. You would also have Apple Configurator running on this device. Now, here's a piece that, until I actually sat down and worked with it, I didn't really expect. And that is, there are configurations that you will build in Intune, and then those configurations will be published to the device a couple of different ways. So there's the concept of in Intune, 2 ways to basically, in Apple Configurator, 2 ways to enroll the device. The first is called Setup Assistant. So this would basically factory reset the device, and you would walk through the welcome screens just like it was a brand new setup, and then MDM provision it as a part of that, right? There's another way that does not require a factory reset called direct enrollment. So specifically, if you have a device where there will be no user affinity on that device, the user on that device doesn't matter, then you can actually provision that device through Configurator, avoiding the factory reset, right? So I'll actually show you that one in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Right? So the first thing that we want to do is actually use Intune, pull Intune back in so you can see the configuration of the configurator stuff. Right? So let me pull that in. Okay, and scroll back over. And so right along here, there's this Apple configurator section. Okay, and so here you can look at how many devices are out there, profiles. And so with devices, I've actually got 3 loaded. Okay, and so this is my test one. These are all test ones that I've created. And so the idea here is that you will import, if you will, devices that you want to be managed through Configurator into this list so you can then manage them. So the way you do that is you select Add, and then you select a profile that you want to assign to the device, right? So I haven't shown you the profiles yet, but these are 2 sample ones I've created. And then you will import a CSV file that contains the devices in question. So here, I'll just open this up real quick. I'll open it up in Notepad just because it's easy. CSV is an Excel format, but I'll open it in Notepad. So what you have is the serial number of that device, comma, and then details about that device. In my case, I'm just calling it Test iPhone. Right? Now, I have 1 device in this list. You can have up to 5,000, I think it was, rows in your CSV. It needs to be in a CSV format. And then when you load that up into Intune, the devices will populate over here. Right? And now once I have the devices populated, I can go into, I've already assigned the profiles, right? So you probably want to do this reverse of how I'm showing you. You want to create the profiles first and then import the devices, and then you can tie them together. You can certainly go and look at things over here once they're set up and so on. You can, yeah, okay. So now that I've got the devices, I have profiles. So I can go create a new profile, or I have these profiles already created. So I'll just click on one, and we'll see the devices that are associated with the profile. So even if I don't have the devices, if I import the devices first when I'm creating the profile, I can go associate them here, no problem, just by clicking on Add Device, and it will provide me a list, and I can put them in accordingly, and so forth. Right? Then there's the actual properties of the profile. And so you will see some familiar things here, such as what is my enrollment style? Enrollment with user affinity, enrollment without user affinity, right? And that's really all, and then the authentication. That's really all of the configuration I do in Intune. The rest of it's done through Apple Configurator itself, right? So I show you that because now that we've got the device kind of set up, we know what the profile is going to be, etc. One of the things that we need to do then to get this ready for use in Configurator is we need to export the profile. So let me just go back up here to the main thing. Good enough, profiles. So let me just click on the top one, which is the profile with user affinity, right? This bottom one is the one without user affinity. We'll click on this one. So I have an export profile option, and so I'll get 2 choices. I'll get set up assisted enrollment. So this is the one that factory resets the device, right? And it kind of goes through a DEP-like experience, but just driven by Configurator. And then there's this one called direct enrollment, right? So this one I cannot actually do right now. This one requires that I use a profile without user affinity. So now if I export the profile, I do have this option. So I can use, if I'm using direct enrollment and without user affinity, I can do the export, here, right? So once we have those pieces together, now the magic will be to get it set up in Configurator. So let me pull my MacBook Air into the picture. All right, so let me grab it, if I can, there. Okay, so this is my Mac, right? Okay, so what I've done is I'm actually mirroring the Mac screen. And so let me launch Configurator. So here's Configurator. All right, we'll launch it up. And so right now I don't have any devices actually connected, so I don't have a whole lot of options that I can use. But let me grab a device. I'm just going to grab an iPad that I have handy, and I'm going to connect it up to a USB cable. So doing that as soon as I can get the USB cable plugged into the device. And it's now connected. So we'll let it come up to speed here, and looks like Configurator is recognizing it. So I see my iPad here, right? So I want to go through and I want to configure this. So the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to select the device and then go through. Now again, I'm doing this configuration with user affinity. So that means I'm going to use what the experience you're going to see here is the setup assistant is going to pop up. Now you won't see that because I can't really share the screen of my iPad other than what you're seeing here, which isn't a live screen on the iPad. I can't really share the screen of the iPad while it's in the setup experience, but I will just go through the prepare. So I'll click prepare. And then what I will do is choose. Am I going to do manual configuration? Am I going to do automatic configuration? So if I choose automatic configuration, you'll see that it's going to tell me, okay, hey, dep is what you want, right? So I'm going to choose manual. And I do have a couple of options underneath. But then the next question is, okay, great, you're going to do manual configuration. Do you want to MDM enroll this thing? Do you not want to MDM enroll this thing? If you do want to MDM enroll this thing, then choose the portal that you want, right? And so I've actually previously configured this. So this is the URL. The setup assistant URL that I showed you was created in Intune. That is the URL that is configured in here. And so whenever Apple Configurator actually works on the device, it will have that URL to reach out for the Intune configuration and enrollment and do that as part, right? And then I'll click next. And then the next question is, okay, great. So what is my organization? I just use my name. And then what screens during the setup process do you want to show? Show all of them, show select ones, whatever you want, right? And that's as far as I'm going to go with this one, right? Because if I ran this, you wouldn't see it anyway. It would just be sitting there on the device, and it would be kind of boring, right? Showed you dep. That's a very similar kind of user experience, and the user won't really matter here anyway because this is typically IT provisioning it through Configurator, right? Okay. So, but let me cancel out of this. And another way that you can do this is, I want to stop. Another way that you can do this is to do a provisioning while that device is connected, but not wiping the device, not causing it to factory reset. The way I'm going to do that is click Add, right? And I'm going to add a profile. So I showed you in Intune, there's the ability to export a profile, right? And that's the direct enrollment method. It gives you an export. It's going to ask you to save a file. And so if I click Profiles, it's going to show me this config file, right? So mobile config file. This file is the one that I downloaded from Intune, and I actually attached it as a mail attachment in my case, and logged on to mail through the browser and the Mac and pulled down the attachment, and here it is, right? So now I'm just going to choose that attachment or that file and say, okay. Actually, before I do that, let me share my iPad screen again. Let's do that. Cancel. Actually, let me make sure that my management profiles are not here, if there are any that came back. Doesn't look like there are. Good. So let me share this screen. And so we should have two screens side by side here shortly. Okay, good. So here's my iPad. So I'm going to, in Configurator, go ahead and, let me go back to the home screen. There we go. In Configurator, I'm going to go ahead and say Go, right? Add. And so now it may take a second or two. You'll see it working, but you should see some things pop up on the iPad in just a second, installing profiles and things. Let me orient that the correct way again. It'll take a second or two to get that done through the USB cable. All right, and here it comes. So we popped up settings, and now we have this management profile to install. We're going to install it, very much the same experience as before, and that will get installed, and we are good to go. So there is no company portal to install here because this is installing without user affinity. It's just registering the device, and that really is it, right? So that's using Apple Configurator to set things up and so forth, right? So let me go ahead and pull this out of the window. Actually, I may keep that connected for a minute. We may come back to it, and I'll pull my Mac out of the window because we'll definitely come back to that in a minute. All right, so let me pull Intune out of the way as well. And so that's using Apple Configurator to actually register the device. The next one, and final one that I'll show you, is enrolling the Mac itself. Okay? So the Mac enrollment options are fewer. This is basically a manual kind of thing, so it's the BYOD personal device kind of thing. There is the ability to enroll a Mac as a corporate-owned device. It's using what are called the Device Enrollment Manager accounts. Think of it as a service account instead of a real user account for doing the enrollment. We talked about that in the first session as we were introducing some of these ancillary topics, right? But the process basically is that the user on the Mac is going to go through a process to enroll that by going to a web page. It's a manual process, very similar to the BYOD that I showed you before. So to make that work, let's go ahead and pull back in the Mac. It is where I left it off, so I'll close a few windows and so on. All right, so let me go back to the Mac, and I will stop it, and I will actually close Configurator because I'm done with this for now. Quit. Okay, good. So I'm still sharing. So what I'm going to do is just with a browser. Let me open Safari. Just with a browser, I'm going to go, and it should remember this, to portal. And there it is, portal.manage.microsoft.com. Let's hit that again. There we go. Okay, good. So it's going to the portal. And so here, basically, I'm going to go through the process. Yeah, I've got to log in. Thankfully, it remembers my big, long username. And now it's going to ask me, okay, hey, what do you want to do? I'm going to say my devices. It'll show me the devices that it knows about associated with me. If one of these happens to be the device I'm on, thumbs up, I can just select it and move on. But in this case, it's not, so I'll just select anywhere in this bar. And it'll come to a screen and say, what do I want to do? I want to enroll. And so it's going to say, okay, great. In order to enroll, you have to download software. That software is the company portal. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. You'll see the download is starting over here for Safari. And here it already is. I've actually got the company portal already loaded, but let's work through it. Okay, great. Let's see. Oops, I apologize. I realize now, after staring at this for a second, that I'm actually looking at the trash. Don't want to look at the trash. I want to look over here at the download. So this is still in process. It will be done in just a minute with the download, and then we can open the install and go forward. All right. So let's just give it a second, and once that's done, I'll be able to launch it. And there it is, right? So let's go ahead and start this. I'll launch it. Yeah, I'm going to go forward and accept and agree and continue. And now I've got to supply my password of my account on this Apple system to approve the install. And then off we go. And the install is done. Now, does that mean that I'm done with setting things up? No, it doesn't. I've actually got to go launch the company portal. And then similar to the way it was on the iPhone, I will have to go through and let it register and so forth. So we'll go through that process, and now I've got to supply my password, so get that done. Good enough, and so that's loading up. All right, so now continuing, I'm going to go forward and go forward and go forward, and so I'm registering the Mac and should be fairly well along into the process at this stage. Installing management profile, very similar process to what had happened on the iPhone and iPad. So again, I'm going to give permissions to install. Good enough. And syncing device data. So we should be basically almost done at this page. So we started off in a browser. Then that browser helped us load the company portal. Now the company portal is finishing up the process and so forth. Okay, so go forward, confirm device management. Yes, okay, good. So I'm now all set up. Now I get the prompt again for device category. So same categories, right? No problem. So I'll say I'm done. And so the company portal is now loaded. You'll see that I have my Mac installed. So if I pull the Mac out of the picture, and now we go get the Intune again and pull it in, then we'll see that it actually is registered now. All right, grabbing that. All right, good, good. Okay, so let's go back into devices. Devices. And then Azure AD devices. And so you'll see my MacBook Air. It is Azure AD registered. And if I look at all devices, it's right here, and it's registered as a personally owned device, right? So let's pull this back out of the picture. So that's Mac enrollment, right? Pretty easy to get the Mac enrolled. Once you have it enrolled, you can manage it fully with whatever configuration settings are available in Intune. All right. So in terms of enrollment and the company portal, so let me just say, again, there's a lot of things that we can talk about related to the company portal, and we need to, and we will in a future session. But for now, we're using the company portal. We're seeing the company portal as it relates to enrolling the device. Okay, and so as we do that, there are really a couple of different scenarios. So for user-initiated manual enrollment, the company portal absolutely is required. It is the mechanism to trigger enrollment for the scenario. For macOS, the company portal, absolutely required. It triggers enrollment, right? For DEP or Apple School Manager or Apple Configurator, depending, the company portal is completely optional. It is not required to actually do the enrollment. If you're doing with user affinity, it is required in order for that user to be able to interface with Intune. If you're not doing with user affinity, it is not required for that user to be able to, because the user on the machine doesn't really matter, right? Okay. And again, we'll do a session on the company portal specifically in another session. There is one thing that I want to show you on the company portal specifically while we're here, because one of the things we talked about last time with Windows is the idea of interacting with Intune, with your MDM solution, right? And so here we have the same ability. So in Windows, we would go through settings, and oops, I cleaned that off, didn't I? Let me see if I can do this another way real quick. All right, so I just actually went through and reinstalled this thing just so I would have it on this device. And so basically, once you have the company portal open, if you want to interact I'm just going to have to stop this a couple of times. If you want to interact and have the device check in with Intune manually, just go to Devices, and then you can tap on the device, and then go ahead and say Check Settings. So notice the time that it checks settings, right? Last. So if I go check settings again, maybe the time updates, I don't know, but notice that it shifts really quick over to another screen where you see details about the OS as it's checking in, and then once it's done, it comes back, right? And so that essentially is causing this device to check in with the Intune service. Largely, that probably isn't necessary to do. It is an option that you have, and so it's good to know about and be able to talk about. But why is it an option that you probably don't really need that much? So let me pull this iPhone out of the picture again. So recall the discussion about Windows and how we have what's called the Windows Notification Service, right? And it's used for a whole lot of things besides MDM. But in the Windows world, if you go create a configuration in Intune, and Intune then knows, hey, it's targeting these Windows devices, Intune will send a notification to the Windows Notification Service, which maintains a persistent connection to the Windows device, and say, hey, Windows device, go check in, something changed. So it's a really, really quick process, right? Yeah, you can do it manually on Windows if you want to. Well, Apple has the same kind of thing. It's called the Apple Push Notification Service, and it's used for a number of different things outside of MDM, but it certainly can be used for MDM. And this actually probably is an outdated graphic now. It's a really simplistic graphic to kind of show how it works. Very similar in concept to Windows Push Notification, right? But this is an option, and this is kind of how it works, right? Okay. Troubleshooting. So there's a number of different scenarios that you might want to troubleshoot on a device that is MDM and Intune registered and so on. There's a few options I'll just show you. I'm not going to go into any depth on them here. In our concept, we're kind of thinking about maybe enrollment troubleshooting, Apple Push Notification Service troubleshooting, those kinds of things. It could be other things, right? So let me just show you a couple of things that I think are pretty cool here. So I'm going to pull back in my iPhone that I have. Let me log back into it. All right, and go ahead and share my screen again. I think it stopped sharing on me. Here we go. All right, good enough. So I'm going to go ahead and install this so it quits bugging me. Okay, so now I'm in the company portal. Here I am, right? Let's just say that I'm in the middle of a problem and it's really frustrating to me. And so I just shake this device because I'm angry. And now look what pops up. It's called Shake and Send, actually. And I haven't tested it, but I read somewhere, I think, that this is enabled for Windows devices now. I don't know that. Don't quote me on that. But I think it's pretty cool. Just be able to shake the device while it's in the company portal. You can click on the log, and you can view the log live. And this has a lot of detail that you might find useful, certainly in troubleshooting, or if you don't like reading on the screen of an iPhone or even an iPad, you can send that diagnostic report to yourself. Just send the diagnostic report. It'll give you the option. It's going to send it to Microsoft in this case, because Microsoft is the registered owner of my tenant, but I can also email the details. If I have email set up on the device, I can attach it, send it to whatever email address, use whatever log reader I might want to use. My favorite is CM Trace, being a config manager person as well, right? But a pretty cool way to be able to get troubleshooting done. Another way that's really useful is through a Mac, right? The Mac connected a Mac connected to the device. So let me go ahead and pull this out, get rid of that. Let me pull the Mac in that I have tucked off to the side. All right, and we'll go to the Mac and actually get rid of the company portal. I don't need it for now. And get rid of Safari. All right, so I'm still mirroring my screen. So what I'm going to do is actually go back and launch Configurator. Right. So I'm going to launch it, and I don't have a device attached right now, but I do. I have my iPad attached. Okay, good. So I'll just use my iPad. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I can double-click on this. I never really thought in a Mac world to double click. I should have, right? But I double click, I find this detail, which just gives me a bit of information about the device. But then if I go click on console, and this is about as far as I'm going to take it, you'll start to see live debugging detail about the device. So if you're having a problem, just go recreate the problem on the device, and now you can see the detail through Configurator, right? Which is really cool. There's another option as well. Let me get rid of Configurator. So I don't know where this was introduced in the Apple OS world, but if you go to the magnifying glass and then type in console, right? It's going to launch the console. And very similarly, it's going to start reading debug information. And there's just different choices of things you might do between copy and paste, saving files, whatever it is. So, a few different choices between console and configurator. Take a look at both, whichever one works for you. And I'm not going to, again, go into the detail of the debugging here, but just to show you where it is. There's also an option in the Apple world that I'm not going to show you. I'll just call it out. That's used a lot by developer types and so on, called Xcode. It's a kind of similar thing to Visual Studio in the Windows world and is useful for debugging different things as well, right? So with that, it really is all I wanted to show you about enrolling and managing the enrollment process for Apple devices, iOS, macOS. So we'll end this session here. The next time we get together, we'll be talking about similar kinds of concepts and focusing on Android devices. So we'll see you next time.